Hello, everybody. We already have so many participants. While we wait for everyone to join, there is a poll active, if you care to answer. The poll question is, what is your responsibility for IT/OT security? How many of you are 100% focused on OT security? Looks like a few of you. Okay. Fascinating.
Those are going to be the one with the tough questions.
For the next hour or so, I am also 100% focused on OT security. So
there you go.
All right. Let's give a minute or two more for everyone to join in. And also, I would love to remind everyone who is joining that our Q&A is open, and we definitely encourage you to ask any questions, and we will do our best to answer them. Give one more minute here. No. We have so many participants. It's so nice to see everyone. All right, and with that, I think it's time to get started. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we are looking forward to diving into all things OT and ICS. So once everybody's gotten logged in, just remember, please, that if you have any questions, drop them into the Q&A, and we will do our best to answer them. We really love getting questions. I love answering questions, sometimes even correctly, so don't be shy. So let's get started with, we are very excited to welcome two experts from GuidePoint Security today, and thank you both so much for being here. GuidePoint is one of runZero's most trusted partners, and is very well known in the industry for their expertise and guidance that they bring to the table. So first up on our panel, everybody please applause for Pascal Ackerman.
Hey.
Pascal is a true master of his craft with 25 years of experience in industrial network design, information and network security, risk assessments, pen testing, threat hunting, and incident and response forensics. And after almost 2 decades of hands-on in the field, and with OT, when they say in the field, they actually mean in the field sometimes, in the field and consulting experience, Pascal joined GuidePoint in May of 2022 and is currently the principal cybersecurity consultant of the operational technology team. Pascal's passion lies in something we can all relate to here at runZero, which is discovering and analyzing new and existing threats to IT, OT, and ICS environments. He fights cyber adversaries both from his home base and while traveling the world with his family as a digital nomad. So welcome, Pascal. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. With an introduction like that, there's nothing much more for me to say, except maybe a little anecdote around the field example you said. I actually had a project at some point where I went from one side of the US to the other side of the US, following a pipeline and testing out every single substation for Wi-Fi connectivity and all that stuff. So that was in the field for like 2 weeks, living from city to city. Yeah, glad to be here.
That's a great way to see the country. I should try
that
sometime.
Yep.
Next up, everyone, please say hello to Patrick Gillespie, who serves as the OT practice manager for GuidePoint. Patrick began his career in the security industry in 2005 and has deep experience in information and operational technology, vulnerability and risk assessments, penetration testing, security architecture, and incident response. He's a veteran of the United States Army. Patrick worked in military intelligence for a number of years. He spent the first 11 years of his civilian career architecting and building high availability network infrastructure for global manufacturing companies. And so we are thrilled to have such a deep OT expertise on our panel today, and we cannot wait to hear from you more. So Patrick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rob. Glad to be here.
And next we have runZero's founder and CEO, HD Moore. and many of you know HD from our runZero hour. HD is a pioneer of the cybersecurity industry who has dedicated his career to vulnerability research, network discovery, and software development since the 1990s. He's the most recognized for creating Metasploit and is a passionate advocate for open source software and vulnerability disclosure. HD has also held leadership positions at Atreides Partners, Rapid7, and Breaking Point, and is a frequent speaker at industry events such as Black Hat and DEF CON and CypherCon last week, right?
Right.
Not that long ago. Yeah, last week. HG's professional journey began with exploring telephone networks. I feel that. Developing exploits for the Department of Defense and hacking into financial and institution networks. That's probably a story that maybe you'll have to tell me one of these days. So, HD, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And finally, last and given the people on this panel definitely least, I'm Rob. I'm the Director of Security Research here at runZero, and I'm going to serve as your moderator for today. So I've been in information security for about 2+ decades now, and I've done research for DARPA and Tipping Point and all these other places, and I just love finding vulnerabilities and identifying devices. So with that, let's kick it off. So first on the agenda today, we're going to talk about active scanning and passive scanning in OT environments. So for a long time, OT environment scanning was strictly passive. And Pascal, how is that better or worse than active scanning in an OT environment?
Yeah, well, maybe a little correction. So for the longest time, nobody scanned the OT space, right? There were often times where they had standalone networks with industrial control systems that nobody were touching, and nobody was really interested in the security field in it. But as things were progressing, and the much dreaded word convergence came into existence, people wanted to know, what does my environment look like? So a lot of companies jumped on the ship and they created monitoring tools that were passive by nature. So they would sit on a spam session, on a spam port within your network, and by looking at the packets, they could deduct what kind of PLCs, HMIs, workstations you had on there, and even some of them can tell you what kind of vulnerabilities or even attacks are going on your network. So those were mainly passive, but over the last couple of years, we've seen those tools add functionality around active scanning or active queries, right? Where they don't just maybe they don't actively scan as like an Nmap does, but more like, so they use the native protocols on these systems to go in and interrogate the Modbus protocol, the SIP, the Ethernet IP protocols, to find out more about those devices. So we see that, and honestly, what we're doing here today is just to say, be less scared of active scanning. We know it in the past, right? Not a decade ago, we were still able to bring ICS networks down with a ping of death. Those devices have slowly been replaced. I'm not advocating that you should go out and scan an active network. By all means, if you do scan your ICS production floor, do it during production downtime, maintenance window or something. But what we're more about talking is that, yeah, you can scan these environments, and there's a couple of things that you want to look out for. But apart from that, it has come a long ways where you can actually go out and find more detailed information by active scanning.
And you mentioned Modbus, Ethernet IP, all that. How have you seen these protocols? They're not super widespread outside of the OT environment, right? How have you seen that evolve in terms of scanner abilities, recognizing these OT specific protocols?
Yeah, there's been a ginormous uptick in protocol support from numerous vendors, right? Where some of these started off with a handful of protocols they supported. They now support pretty much every protocol under the rainbow. So yeah, we've seen lots and lots of research, and there's a big market for this as well. About every company I talk to, they are in a stage where they either don't know what they have in their environment, or they're partially there. They use Excel files, so they bring in a tool like this, and it's really been an uptick in the last decade from where we didn't know what was on an ICS network to now have a pretty good understanding just by passively looking at it.
And so just by passively looking at it, but so how is active scanning better than passive scanning?
So with passive scanning, your tool is only as good as the data you give it. So if you're if you have a pretty complex network with which you're following, like the Cisco campus model, where you have distribution switches, endpoint switch and all that, and you're only looking at the distribution switch, you put a span port off of there, or you're only looking at like the firewall that sits between the enterprise and the industrial networks, you're going to miss a lot of this data that's going on the same switch, like a PLC to a PLC or a PLC to IO communications. And there's ways of getting more agents out there, getting more appliances to look deeper into your network. But sometimes it's just not possible to get all of that information. So with an active scan, you can actually go around and scan the network for those places where typical passive tools don't reach.
Okay. And speaking of active scanning, I hear you actually have a bit of a demo to show us.
I do actually, yeah. And it's going to be
please.
It's going to be a live demo, so anything can happen. Can you see my screen?
I can. If anybody can't see Pascal's screen, please drop something in the Q&A.
What we're looking at here on the right-hand side is a diagnostic page for an Allen Bradley PLC, an L63, or more precisely, actually, this is the communications module that sits on the same rack with the PLC. This first page, you can see the part number, the serial number, all that stuff. This is not very, very interesting stuff. But then what I wanted to touch on is that in an ICS environment, your ICS or your OT devices are typically limited by size, limited by CPU power, limited, and how many connections they can actually accept. So as we go scanning with the wrong tools or with the wrong methodologies, we can create havoc in these systems. And just to give an idea of what connections are within the ICS environment, this page is showing us all the current connections to this particular Ethernet module. So if you can see, looking at the web page has opened port 80 from our workstation to the PLC. And as this is refreshing, I'm establishing new connection and stuff is waiting. So this is a typical TCP/IP stack. Now, if we open a PLC program and we connect the PLC, we connect our workstation to the PLC, you'll see an additional connection open up here. And this is why controls engineers have a lot of time to drink coffee, because these things take a while to start up.
Yep. Oh, there we go.
Yep. So I just opened up RS Logix 5000, which is the programming environment for an Allen Bradley PLC. And as soon as we say go online, we can witness an additional connection coming up.
Yep.
Right there. So if you notice, we're using port 44818, which is a typical port for PLCs to program over. And what's really scary is that you can find those if you go to Shodan, for example. You can look for that port, and you'll be amazed how many systems have exposed that port directly to the internet. So that means that with this software, I could just point at them and start programming them. But that's an off-topic conversation. Another important.
Don't do that.
So another important. Let me shut this down for now. So you have to close. Notice how this doesn't close off the connection with the PLC, but it's RS links running in the background that you have to shut down because it's a permanent connection to the PLC now. The connection is gone. Let's switch to a little less busy screen. But what I wanted to show now is that with a typical Nmap scan, I always recommend using the flag T2 when you do an Nmap scan of your PLC or your an environment to keep it nice and slow.
What does the T2 stand for?
It's
aside
like
from being the second best Terminator movie.
That's fair enough. Now it's the amount of traffic you throw at your devices, so how fast basically your packet rate, which I think we're going to talk about in a bit as well. But it is just slowing Nmap down to a point where it's more manageable for the network itself. Because I've only talked about the end devices so far, but typically in an older ICS environment, the network itself isn't always up to speed, isn't always up to par, isn't always the greatest and latest architecture and devices. So keeping things slow is not only good for your end devices, but it's also good for the network infrastructure. So you do a T2, it's going to scan, and as we look at this page, you can see that Nmap affects the CPU utilization of this device just by a slight, right? That's why I'm showing the T2 right now. It's going to go to the scan. It's going to stay on the on this low CPU utilization until the scan is done. So just to show the difference between a T2 and a T5, which T5 is the highest and the fastest and the most aggressive way you can scan with Nmap. This might be done in a short time, but you'll see that the utilization goes up through the roof almost. And you're still, because nothing else is going on this PLC, this is still not crashing the PLC, but if other stuff were to go on, and typically these environments have multiple PLCs talking to other PLCs, IO racks, there's a lot of stuff going on. So this could already take one of these PLC systems down.
And these PLCs could be connected to, important real world things that you do not want interrupted.
Absolutely. Yeah, just to show what you actually can get out of an Nmap scan targeted at a PLC, we're going to use the scripting language that's built into Nmap, and we're going to use the ENIP, which is the protocol that the port is listening on. And let's see what we can get for this device. So it came back really quickly. You didn't even notice any CPU utilization. But here you can see all of the details that this script was able to pull from the controller, and it's actually using the SIP protocol to interrogate the backplane and the PLC and the IO modules for the script purposes.
And Pascal, Nmap in this case, this is really just doing a TCP port scan, like sending much of the TCP send request, and it's doing not really much else to the web server. If you were to run something like a web app phone scanner or something like that against the device, what would happen to it?
That's a good question. So yeah, I of course I've been playing with this, and as part of being security aware, you want to test your tools, right? So let's use GoBuster, for example, the much used web directory brute forcing tool, and let's just give it the IP address, just give it a typical directory list for it to scan for, and leave everything default apart from that. So I got to say, when you run this, you'll see that by default it uses 10 threads, and right away you'll notice that the web page is very sluggish. And if this was actually refreshing, you would see 100% now. GoBuster is coughing up errors because we're dropping connections. You see here, this is not actually eating up the connection count, right? We're only it only has a single connection, but because we're interrogating that same port over and over, do you have this file, do you have this directory, and it just keeps on doing that. You're actually overloading the web server at this point. I got to mention, even though the web server is now overloaded, we can still make ENIP connections, and we can still connect our programming station to this. We'll see in a little bit later how we can mess that up as well. But this is just an example of how you want to test your scripts before you try them. Because let this recover for a second. If we just add one single option to it, and we scale it down to 2 threads, you'll see that the device will actually handle this. Again, you don't want to do this in full production. It's still hitting the limit. Maybe you want to scale down to a single thread, but the point of the conversation is that you want to try these tools before you go and use them in your environment.
And so what are some of the things that you would recommend to tune down? So you've got the packet rate and things like that. Did you also want to maybe show a scan with runZero of this device?
Yeah, so yeah, look, your packet rate is a really good example. You want to scale that down. You want to keep your threads to a minimum. You don't want to open up too many connections right off the bat. Yeah, you want to do it low and slow, and by all means try it out in a test environment. Try it out on your production systems, but when they're not in production, but make sure you verify the effect of your scans and and the actions you're performing on those devices before you do this at large scale.
Yep.
Yeah, so let's run a runZero scan. So we talked about active scan. At this point, really for the later in the conversation, do we want to enable the passive monitoring right now as well while we're waiting on the other stuff, or have you been running that in the background? Just a quick question.
It's been running in the background. We've got a separate organization set up that's doing active capture, and also another one where we imported some PCAP file.
Perfect. All right, so this is the runZero interface. Maybe HD can say a little bit more about it, but typically the way this works, you install an agent, which is sitting on this machine right here on the Kali Linux. I install the agent, it communicates with the cloud service, and I'm actually going through a DMZ, so it does the relaying and the brokering to keep security and segmentation in place, because it runs over HTTPS. But the agent communicates with the runZero console. From here, we can start a scan. So we're gonna, for the purpose of this demo, we're gonna do just a standard scan. We're gonna aim at the PLC we were looking at. Anything else we want to change, HD? Typically I like to keep this at 200 to 250 packets. This is the scan rate, so this means that we're limiting the runZero agent to only send out 200 packets per second. Yeah, per second, and that really helps with keeping our scan low and slow.
Now the default rate of 1,000 ends up being about 256 kilobits. When you only have a single target, though, there's a second throttle that kicks in as well. So we have an overall fire hose rate, which is 200 here. If you click on the advanced tab, there's actually a maximum per host rate as well. And so we always pick the lower of the two when you're doing a scan. So even if you set 1,000 packets per second as your scan rate, we will not go over that 40 maximum host rate. You can even drop that down to 1 packet per second per host, but 1,000,000 packets per second at the overall network scan. And as long as you scan wide enough, you can do a very large network very quickly, safely.
Yeah, I learned something new. So is there anything else we want to change? Knowing that this is an Ethernet IP device, do we want to enable ports, or is everything out of the box good to go?
You could go out of the box. Our idea is that theoretically you don't have to worry about this stuff. You click go and we do everything we possibly can safely. For some protocols like DMV3, we enable some, if you know like your bus ID and things like that, you can configure those protocols separately. But if we can safely discover it without triggering any potential downsides, we'll do that by default.
All right, I believe we need to be fast if we want to look at. We continue to look at the utilization. You see hardly any changes, and I believe it already performed, or is it starting? Hold on.
No, it's still in there. There we go.
As you can see, very little CPU utilization. That's because we got the scan rate really low. I've tried it up to about 2,000, and then the utilization starts the CPU utilization starts to hit around 80-85%. So I always like to be very cautious with scanning these environments.
Yeah, we do a lot of stuff to make sure that we don't overload the local broadcast domain, like your ARP traffic and things like that, as well as the individual device, as well as middle devices between you and the scan. So by default, the scanner will actually actively reset sessions in middle device firewalls, as well as managing the per broadcast domain rate as well. So it's a lot of kind of predictive, guessy stuff kind of in the engine to make sure that we don't blow things out of the water.
Yep.
And I think that's something. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I was just going to point out the active host is not even picking up the actual connections we're doing. But go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that the poor middle devices are often forgotten in these things. Everybody focuses so much on, are you going to overload my end device, and then they neglect to mention that there's a switch and a router and all these other devices in between that have to transmit all that traffic, relay all that traffic.
Yep. Yeah, and it's easy with scanners like this, and if you have multiple agents out there as well, it's easy to overload like a firewall or a switch even, right? And I've seen ICS environments where they're still using hubs to do their networking, and yeah, I can only imagine what kind of damage you do.
So Pascal, I would never have known from the CPU utilization, but it looks like the scan is done. If you
Yep.
click
So
on
it hit about 40% at some point. I noticed, and I wish Alan Bradley would put a trend in here so we could trend it out. And there's probably ways to use SNMP to bring it out to like a Nagios network stream. But from doing extensive testing with this, I've hit 40% utilization on this particular setup with a scan rate of 200. So now that the scan is done, we can take a look at the. I'm going to rely on UHD to pretty much point to the areas of concern, but much like the Nmap scan did, it found the brand, the type, it found the some of the metadata, including the factory name, and I thought it picked up like the serial number as well.
Oh, it does. If you scroll down to keep scrolling, go down to the ENIP down there somewhere.
Yeah, one of our goals is any data that we collect from runZero, we give it back to you. We don't throw it away. So if you have a response that indicates like from Ethernet IP or from other protocol, and you want to be able to search that after the fact, all that data is preserved in the UI and is searchable for the inventory.
Yeah. So there you have serial number, product, communications adapter, Ethernet IP.
And it picked up a whole bunch of ports besides that 44818, right? So we get the TCP port here. There's SNMP on this device. Do you automatically query the SNMP strings as well? You're looking for certain data.
We do a really light SNMP walk if you have a private or public are set, and you can also specify your own V3 credential or your own V2 private credential when you write from there. And we do some device-specific OID pulling as well. So, if you want to get your Fortinet device's serial number or your Juniper serial number, we enumerate those modules as well as part of it.
Yeah, there's just a whole lot of information to be had here, and the scan didn't really. Oh, this is neat as well. So you're taking a screenshot of the web page that's running on there. And the scan didn't take that much longer as an Nmap scan, right? And as we saw, the utilization was very light.
Yeah, in the scan details itself, it'll indicate like how many packets it actually sent, what the maximum rate was, all that stuff. And I think we sent about like 2,000 TCP packet or 2,000 packets total as part of the scan with this device. And that was it. And we received, about a third of those. So it's a really efficient scan. We really talk about like, eating all the parts of the buffalo here when it comes to network traffic. And we peel anything we can out of every little bit we get back to reduce how much we have to send.
I love squeezing all the information out. It's so much fun. Speaking.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and it's all in a database, and you can rescan this, and you can set it on a timely, right, and it will give you a delta between the two. It will tell you if the system is online and stuff. So there's a whole bunch of information to be had.
And I believe we also had. Were we watching this passively at the same time?
Oh, I think the passive is on a different organization right now. It's connected to the lab as well.
Oh, okay.
So if you want to set it up in the background, I just wanted to show one more thing. So we talked about CPU utilization. We saw how a simple Go buster, right? And if some people will bring it up to 20 threads, which would completely kill this device at least on the web port for it. But there's another way you can really mess up your scanning, and that's by connection count. So I wrote a really terrible script. Please don't use this in your environment, but it's just a simple Python script that opens up 200 threads. Every thread is going to connect to port 44818, which is our Ethernet IP port, and it's just going to sit there for 150 seconds doing nothing. So when we run this, we'll see that we will automatically or really quickly hit the maximum supported TCP IP, Ethernet IP port count, right? We're completely maxed out. The result of doing this is that now we will not be able to connect our programming terminal or any new PLCs or any new HMIs or any new I/O modules to this controller anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Time for coffee again.
Good old state table exhaustion.
So now when we try to connect like we did before, it's just going to sit here and spin its wheels, literally spin its wheels. And it's not gonna be able to connect until this script finishes. So what this is representative of is a security tool that opens just up as many threads as it needs to interrogate like a very complicated protocol like the SIP, like the Common Internet Protocol, which runs over Ethernet IP. You have a tool that opens up 120 threads, 150 threads, and interrogates that SIP protocol from every angle it can think of. That's a very, very bad way of doing things, right? As you can see, it basically created a DOS, a DOS, a denial of service attack on that particular controller. So when this finishes, we will see that the count is going to go back to 0. And 150 seconds is a long time if you're waiting for it.
It is. It is.
But that gives HD the time to open up the next part of the
true.
demo.
HD, did you want to start preparing us for passive discovery?
Sure. Should be all good to go here whenever we're ready to flip over the screen. Just let me know when you're ready.
A couple more seconds, I believe. One more sip of coffee.
There you go. Hum the Jeopardy theme in the background. Do, 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 do.
One of the neat things about the way that we built the runZero scanner is that effectively it's already a passive scanner. We just send our own traffic, which sounds like silly. For how we do passive, it's exactly the same. If you take a scan from some other third-party tool or even like your RS Links or another HMI tool, and you monitor that with the passive side of runZero, we produce some of the exact same data that you get from an active scan.
Mm-hmm.
We're just limited to what data goes across the wire.
There we go. So you can see the scan is done, or the stupid script is done. No more active connections. And now when we say one active connection, which is us,
There you go. Mm-hmm.
we're online. So that was my part of the demo. So, but the conclusion is that do it low and slow, test out your script, test out your tools before you use them in mainstream production.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. It's very informative. Thank you, Pascal. HD, did you want to take over screen sharing?
Hopefully that actually popped up right.
It
So
did.
device we're just looking at in Pascal's environment, you can see we've got like, OS type, hardware, all that fun stuff, but also a ton of other fields back here if you want to peel it out and say how many vulns does it have, what's the round trip time, things like that. We also let you slice and dice it by services. So if you just want to say, show me everything running Ethernet IP in my environment by UDP or TCP, you can pivot the data like that. We talked about the screenshots a little bit, some other parts too, but where I want to go today is switch into the passive discovery side. So like I mentioned, the passive engine in runZero is effectively just the same as the scanner. It just waits for the traffic as opposed to sending it. And that means it's a little bit different from tools like your Suracatas or your Zeek or other systems that are doing your NDR style flow processing today, because we look for very specific fields that are useful for device fingerprinting. We're not looking for fields that are typically responsible for things like C2 detection or outbound beaconing or things like that. So we're more concerned about asset inventory and device fingerprinting than we are about like, is your device doing something dodgy? We just want to know whether your device itself is dodgy, basically. So it's kind of a different perspective in that sense. So whenever you're doing any kind of vendor eval, most folks would start off and say, well, I don't trust you. Who are you? Why would I give you my data? And that's a very reasonable thing to say. So we also have an on-prem version that you can use during the trial. So just ping our account management team. They can set you up with an on-prem version. It runs on pretty much any Linux box, exactly identical to what you see here. It all works exactly the same way. So feel free to keep your data private during that process. And separately, if you decide, hey, I want to use the SaaS because I don't want to go set up this whole environment, but I want to be able to test out what it looks like, you can just use a straight PCAP import as well. So you can just go upload a packet capture of, PCAP NG, PCAP format, gzip supported. You specify which assets are considered assets you want to see in that PCAP, and we'll go, tear it all out, fingerprint it, do all the fun things. So an example here is the MAP scan that you saw from Pascal earlier. We went ahead and uploaded the PCAP of that scan, and I think it may be, let's see, there's two tasks tied to this. Let me go make sure I grab the right one. So to grab the MAP scan, this is actually of a bigger lab environment. But we're going to go ahead and look at the devices that were identified specifically by this particular task. And looks like we've since updated them all. So, all right, there we go. So you can see like we still have a pretty decent amount of data, not just like the IP that was identified on the v4 side, but also like any v6 addresses associated with it, because we'll look for the link local and tie the two together. We also identify secondary v4 addresses on the same asset, again, by kind of matching devices automatically. So asset correlation for us isn't just about like, okay, I took 3 different sources and merged them together. It's also correlation within the same task or the same import, the same scan. And we pull all kinds of fun data out of it. So you'll see we pull out like the most common HB user agent from it to figure out what type of device it is. You'll see most of the same data that you would from an active scan, but of course there's some fields you only get passive and some fields you just would generally never see passive. But for the most part, it's pretty comparable. All the same functionality of, the slice and dice, drill in by service, search by things all works the same way. So for example, if we want to see like, what are all the different unique Kerberos realms that we saw come across the wire? We can click on the group view over here and get a breakdown of all the different unique domains that were found. And we say, okay, well, what's the end domain? Let's go find those devices. You can then click on that. It'll then pivot back into the search again and find me the devices that were tied to that particular Kerberos domain. And of course, you can drill back into it this way. So in addition to like all the standard attributes around services and assets, we also tell you, is it vertical or not? We tell you how we matched it if we've matched it. And the data down here will be based on whatever traffic it happens to see go across the wire. So if you have a very busy network, you'll see a lot of stuff. If you have a very light network, you won't see very much at all. Let's go ahead and switch over to doing a live capture instead. So again, you can also throw a PCAP import into the SaaS model if you want to see kind of what we can do. And then once you feel a little more comfortable with it and want to set up a full-on capture setup, you're welcome to do it that way. So if we go over to the top here under data sources, you see you've got scans, which we covered previously. You also have integration. So if you want to pull data in from any third-party source, you can do that. But of course, we also monitor. So the way the monitor works is it takes that same Explorer that you already have deployed somewhere in your environment, and you can basically just turn that into a background traffic monitor without really doing any other additional configuration. So let's say that device is deployed in a network where it's just on the, it's not on a special location. It doesn't get a span traffic. It doesn't get any other kind of, coded GRE or Q&Q stuff. You can still turn on discovery and it'll just watch the background network. And in between active scans and integrations, it'll populate any data it sees through like ART, broadcast, MDNS, things like that. So it's almost always worth turning on passive discovery, even if you're not doing a full-on spam port, because you do get a lot of really good data that's kind of like helping round out your inventory and keep things up to date between more active scans and integration passes. In this case, we've decided to list on 2 interfaces. One of them is a span port. One of them is a standard broadcast domain. We told it which IP addresses that we care about that we want to consider our internal assets. Anything outside of that will be considered a peer, not our asset. So if you are using a different IP range for a segment, like using a public IP space or a test range or a carrier grade NAT or similar, you don't want to add those ranges here to the discovery scope. And then everything within those ranges will be considered yours. Everything outside of them will be considered the devices your advisor are talking to in that sense. You can also exclude stuff. You say like, hey, there's a really noisy thing I don't want to look at. You can just add that range or slider here and go from there. Once you save that, it's going to automatically start running those jobs in the background between other tasks. And our idea behind sampling is we want it to be as like inoffensive as possible. We want it to be something you can just turn on and not really think about, and it just magically makes data come in no matter what traffic or what flows are available. So we'll never use more than 1 CPU core of the device you deploy it on. So it's okay if you deploy it on a Raspberry Pi. It's also okay if you deploy it on a massive server. By default, we only use 1 CPU core. We're not going to overload the machine, run out of memory, crash, whatnot. So you can throw a 10 gigabit flow at a Explorer, a runZero Explorer running on a Raspberry Pi, and it's fine. It is smart enough to pick out what traffic it thinks is important, ignore the rest of it, and do a good enough job of still building a great detailed inventory, even with a huge amount of traffic flows going through it. So we'll do things like deprioritize TLS flows. We'll skip through other bits of the traffic. We'll peel out the more important stuff. And we automatically, if we start seeing a ton of duplicate sessions or connections, we'll basically deprioritize those from the sampling process. And that's a little bit different for something like an NDR or, Suricata or kind of Zeek model. Those systems are really designed to show you everything. Like a great way to think about runZero is kind of in contrast to vuln management or in contrast to NDR. In a vuln management system, you cannot miss anything. If you miss anything in your vuln scanner, you failed. Your product doesn't work. That's just all it is. We're not really a vuln scanner, but we do try to tell you when we identify vulnerabilities that you should be aware of. Like if we decide, we observe, hey, you've got a default community being used, you've got some, vulnerable service hanging out in the wind. We want to tell you about that stuff. But again, it's not our job to do a full-on vuln scan. Our job is to tell you things that we can highlight and tell you about your environment that otherwise may have been missed. The same approach also applies to passive. We're not trying to find every single malicious communication, C2 beaconing, weird DNS behavior, scanning between devices. Like that's not in our wheelhouse. What we do instead is we try to tell you the most that we can about each of those assets just from the passive side, and do that in a way that's really simple, really easy. It doesn't require a big pull to deploy. So when you do deployments here, you can, when you configure the interfaces, these interfaces can be a full-on span port, like in the case of this one here. It can be a broadcast domain like this one where it's got an IP assigned to it. It can also be any combination. So if you want to throw Q and Q traffic at it, you want to pipe ER span to the device, you want to do any other kind of encapsulation or tagging, as long as the Explorer is able to observe that traffic coming across it, it's going to peel all those layers off, decode the traffic, and treat it like any other source. So it's about as painless as you get for a passive discovery solution, that you don't really have to care about resourcing. You don't really have to care about the traffic encoding. You just need to make sure that some kind of traffic meets that device, and it'll happily chug along and pull whatever it can out of it to populate your inventory. So we took a very different approach in that sense, because we're not concerned about missing a C2 beacon or missing a particular vulnerability. We're really concerned about providing you the best inventory we can about the asset. And you'll notice here that we did a pretty good job. We found all kinds of stuff. One of the really cool things about passive, when you're able to do it, is even if you're just in the same broadcast domain, is you'll find networks that are not configured in the same subnet. So in this network, it's mostly 192.168.0 and so on. But if you look over here, we've got this random device on a 10.1.8.20 and another device over here with a 50.21.0.1. Like, what are these doing on this network? Like, this is pretty common where organizations accidentally overlay two VLANs. So an active scan actually will not find any of these other IPs because it has no way to route to. It doesn't realize there's any path between the 192 network that it's on and these assets. However, if you enable passive discovery, even on the broadcast domain, we're able to identify these other ranges that might have popped up. One of our customers does a lot of commercial HVAC building management deployments. And it's really common for them to see that corporations accidentally overlap their building network with their enterprise network, but you wouldn't know unless you look at the passive side. And so it's a really kind of key piece there. You can find misconfigurations through passive that are just really difficult to find any other way. And so it's always great if you can turn it on, even if you can only enable it for just pure background traffic on the broadcast domain, that's great. But again, if you have a span port or something like that, even better. You'll notice digging here that we have pretty much all the same attributes. We're able to identify multiple IPs, tie them back together to the same asset. We can find secondary IPs on it. We give you kind of different colored icon here based on whether it was passive or active. But the fingerprinting's about the same. Like, we're still able to tell you like manufacturing date of the device based on MAC age. We can tell you a lot about the hardware itself, firmware versions where you can get them. We can identify end-of-life assets pretty quickly just based on what the OSs are. So old Debian Linuxes, things like that. One of the cool things about runZero too is that if you are enabling the passive mode and you already have some other scanner you'd like to use. So let's say you're using one of those devices that calls themselves like a safe query engine. That's great. Go ahead and keep doing that. Like, turn off runZero scanner entirely, just feed it basically PCAPs or passive traffic, and then use whatever tooling you already have in place, and we'll still do typically a better job than that original tool of fingerprinting those devices. So runZero actually excels in cases, even when you're just watching another scanner run across the network, we'll still pull more information out about the asset using that other party's scan traffic, just because of how careful we are about peeling bits on the wire. I'm sure there's any questions so far about the passive stuff, but happy to jump around a little bit if anyone has any particular areas they'd like to see more detail on.
I just wanted to point out that this is great, right? To be able to detect all of this passively, like the other major tools do. And that's one before we do an engagement with a customer where we scan the network, we deploy the Explorer in their environment, and then a week or two before the engagement, we actually turn on passive mode just to get that information, to get a feel of what we can capture without really scanning the network. So yeah. Much appreciated add-on.
Of course, looking at a couple questions, there's some examples about, let's see, the first one is around looking for a device that is susceptible to simple DOS. One of the really neat ways, I don't know if this is I don't want to use up too much of our time here, but if you go to the report section, we have a what we call the subnet grid report. And this may not work with the data we have, but essentially you go into a subnet, you get a breakdown of a bunch of dots on it, and then you can recolor those dots based on the latency, the TTL, age of the device, the risk of the system. And you can see kind of your riskier devices pop out right away. When you're looking at a really large org, this probably isn't a good example because it's passive only, but we'll track the TTL or the round trip time to the asset, and we can say like how far away is it, how slow is it. All those devices that can be knocked over with simple DOS typically have a much higher latency than your typical modern computers and mobile devices. So you can do a query here, look for any RTT that's greater than a certain value, and those are almost always your embedded devices in one shot. So a really quick way to filter those guys out. I think the other question that popped up is multi-home devices. How do we figure out the device has more than one IP? Easy way is you scan everything and you look at which ones look like the same system and you glue them together. That's the super obvious way. We can do that both in small networks like this, but also across the entire internet. We can say, hey, let's scan all this country and find every router that looks like it's the same router, merge those together. Now we know those routers are multi-homed. We can also go the other direction though and directly query an asset and make it leak out its secondary IPs to us. We have about 20 different ways we can do that. Everything from MDNS to DCRPC endpoint mapper through Octa 2 resolver, all the way through some tricky NetBio stuff we do. But I want to be careful of time here and hand it off to Patrick for the next section.
Thanks, HD. Yeah, I have a kind of a story on why active scanning is looked down upon. So when I was in network architecture at a railcar manufacturing facility, we had a completely separate physical network for OT, separate switches, separate fiber, all the above. Well, of course, I was over, getting those on the network, getting routed, for remote access for vendors and for employees. But I started playing with security tools. Back then, Backtrack Linux. So, started doing, some Nmap scans, that kind of stuff, just to build out some asset inventory. Of course, caused some issues there. But other issues than downtime is I hooked up a dual home PC to that separate physical network on an open VOS server and tried to scan that. And an industrial printer sitting by a lady out in the shop started printing off hundreds of papers that said, "Are you dead?" So she took it very personable and called our help desk freaking out, thinking somebody was targeting her personally. And I had to go over and apologize profusely. So the term active scan can mean many things. So, this is more of I would call it I was in intelligence. Yeah, that was an oxymoron. I know, Army intelligence, but intelligent active scanning is definitely more what this is than typical throwing out an Nmap port scan, just like Pascal showed you. Too many packets, too many threads, your CPU on a device that doesn't have much of a CPU gets maxed out, right? And then, or you got a printer spitting out stuff, or you got another machine that's producing a part that's spitting out stuff it shouldn't be doing. So, so I think that's why, I may have been part of the cause on the bad rap for active scanning. But thanks to HD, we are light years ahead. And I guess that was probably 13, 15 years ago. I don't remember when even Kali Linux came out, but that's been a while. So that was my younger, dumber days, I guess. So let me see.
We've all had those. We've all had those, trust me.
Just
Don't get me
I
started.
think I'm in my older, dumber days at this point, but yeah.
the second dumb days.
Second round. That's right. Let me see if I can start this slideshow.
It was the Trinu backdoor where it sent like a swear word as part of the handshake. And we had a customer back in the early 2000s where we accidentally printed out that swear word in all of their bond paper at their financial org. And they did not like that. It was both really expensive and really offensive.
I think that was the exact plot of an Office episode anyway.
Moving on. All right, now it's all right. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, cool.
Yep, looks good.
So like Rob mentioned, we do a lot with runZero. So other services that we offer. So runZero helps us with finding the devices. So, yeah, vulnerabilities is finding one thing, but if you don't know what devices are on your network, you're not going to be able to find the vulnerabilities, right? You can't secure what you don't know is out there. So as typically when we come in, we'll start with runZero, figure out what's even on the network, because a lot of our clients, maybe the CISO or IT director is now responsible for the security of the OT environment. Right now we have all this convergence, especially since COVID. So clients come to us and say, I'm responsible for the OT security. I'm not even the asset owner for these devices. Sometimes not even asset owner for the layer 2, layer 3 switches and routers, or whatever's out there, right? So part of what we do is help do that asset discovery, build out an asset inventory. Another part of that is your full security program, right? Because runZero is essentially that first step to moving toward a good security program. So, you may already have a security program on the IT side, so you don't have to start from scratch, building out policies and procedures. A lot of that stuff you can modify that already fits your business environment, maybe your enterprise environment, that you can modify for the OT environment. So one of those things we do is, and we get asked a lot, is which framework is best for industrial control systems. And typically we'll find out what are you using already on the IT side, right? There's things like, IEC 62443, very in depth, especially on the component level. NIST has cybersecurity framework. There's NIST 800-82. So there's several things that people can do, and they'll usually ask what's the best. And typically the best is picking one and sticking with it. So if you're already using cybersecurity framework on the IT side, it just makes sense to use cybersecurity framework on the OT side. There's some that some of the controls that matter to industrial control systems, to critical infrastructure, those sort of things. Now, if you're a power company and you got to do NERC SIP, if you're regulated by your industry, of course that's a different conversation. But if you're in manufacturing and you don't have a framework already on the IT side or the OT side, definitely look at cybersecurity framework. And if you have to get 62443 for compliance, those are things we help with, because your GRC essentially is the framework. If you're building a house, your frame, the framework of getting the house built correctly from the start, having a plan, providing reports to your management, to your C-level, and as issues come up, how we're going to do improvements and change requests. And then the big thing is, a roadmap on, to get to a secure state, right? Or moving in that direction, because we're never 100% secure, but having that repeatable process is something we can help with as well. All right. So another thing we do a lot with is architecture review. So this is where the data we take from runZero that we're able to build out an asset inventory. We also use that as part of the architecture review. Now, sometimes clients have a diagram or a network diagram of, maybe OT. Maybe it's just a separate VLAN. Maybe it even has industrial DMZ. Typically, it's flat networks, though, right? So we'll take a look at where you're at. We will take that runZero data, and we will build out your end-state architecture based on what you currently have. Now, if you're building a new manufacturing facility, yeah, we can start from the scratch, plan with your implementers, where it's Siemens, Rockwell, whatever on the automation side, and we can design that, from the beginning to make sure it gets installed properly, on the network architecture. But for your existing environments, I know sometimes a little bit tougher than building new. Just like if you're trying to rebuild a house, it's a little tougher than building new. What we do is you got to do it in phases, right? And you got to do it around downtime. A lot of times plants may run 24/7 now, so you got to do it during downtime around the holidays. When we're able to maybe re-VLAN some devices, or start putting zones into your OT, because when I was in railcar manufacturing, we had a lot of different vendors on the floor. So if we had the plant where we were building axles, for example, the steel came into the line, and then when it's from that point on, when the robot grabbed that steel, put it on the conveyor, from that point on till it got to the shipping, the finished axle got put on the shipping truck, nobody touched that part. It was completely automated, primarily Siemens PLCs, and then all the robotics to get it through the heat treat furnace, all that. But there were a lot of vendors to make that happen, right? So now you got vendor A, maybe from Canada, passing that part to a vendor from Austria on the next machine. So you had to have certain data that went between the devices, right? So we had to have everything zoned out to allow just the traffic to go between the first PLC to the second PLC. Because if you allow the administrative ports 44818, now you have vendor A can now communicate to vendor B's PLC, download the programs, and steal proprietary information. There have been lawsuits where a client does not segment or do microsegmentation properly. So now you got vendors stealing data inside your network, even though there may not be any internet connections at all. So there's getting visibility and asset inventory is the start, and then having segmentation to prevent that lateral movements, definitely a good part of the process. And another thing I saw at the company I work for was built from the 1800s, right? I think the first train engine was like 1804 or 1812. So trains have been around for 200 years, a little bit before IP addresses. So it's been a while. So we didn't really need that stuff, for a long time. So the culture there was really old. IT and the plant people did not work well together. So what I would see going to these plants, whether it was manufacturing or repair plant, I would go out there and do a project. We would maybe install a new PLC, or maybe we would install wireless. you know, for the plant manager to go through and be able to see data from a machine on maybe on a tablet. But when I was out there, I would see internet lines directly connected to these PLC cabinets. So a lot of times when we're doing these runZero scans, we see a lot more devices than what the client expects, right? And the client is surprised. It's like, you know, you see these devices, you might see, you know, a bunch of managed switches on VLAN 1, but like HD showed, you got different subnets, different IP schemes on the same VLAN. That's because somebody went and plugged some other network into that switch and they were all in the same VLAN. So seeing that too from the runZero scan. So the most recent runZero or client we're working with runZero on is a manufacturing facility, and we saw about 8% more devices than what they were expecting. Now, and I know sometimes that number can be 15, 20, 25%. That's just the most recent one, but we saw a lot of you know, wireless devices, ubiquity devices that get plugged in, right? It's real. And back in my day when I was in networking, it was Linksys wireless routers plugged in all over the place. But you know, people would plug that in, connect their phones, connect their laptop, you know, and for the plant engineers, the controls engineers, I mean, they're just trying to do their job, get their job done, produce better parts, have better quality. And then you got IT, you know, some stupid kid like me come in and, you know, starts doing open boss scans. So so that's kind of how runZero ties into a lot of our, you know, framework reviews, our architecture reviews, essentially to get you on a path to get you to where you want to be. And then once you have your security program in place, once you have your good asset management and inventory through runZero, you may have a visibility and management vendor come in, and we partner with all the major OT visibility and monitoring vendors. You may have risk-based vulnerability management from an OT tool, you know, or through runZero. And then that's when an OT pen test is going to provide you value. Because a lot of times a client will come to us and say, hey, I need an OT pen test. We just put our OT network connected to enterprise. You know, we're just converged it, or maybe it might be a separate physical network. And then, so we'll say, you know, what, do you know what protocols are running on your OT environment? Are you running a flat network? Are you, you know, do you even know what assets are out there, right? Because if we're going to tell you 1,000 things that you already know, you're running clear text protocols, you're running a flat network, everything can talk to everybody else. So a pen test is either, you know, A, going to cause issues if, you know, if we do it during production time, or B, not going to provide a lot of value, right? It's going to provide a lot of things that we can tell you already that you probably have in your environment. So starting with that framework, maturity framework assessment, get you onto a framework, start putting in those controls, build out a defensible architecture, you know, and then and secure remote access is a big piece too, because you're going to have a lot of vendors, a lot of employees that need access to specific devices. So then that's where the segmentation and micro segmentation come into play. So let me look in the Q&A. I don't see any questions. Anybody have any questions on any of that or anything? You know, GuidePoint services, or Pascal, you have anything to add?
No, that was a very deep conversation. So absolutely. Yeah, the gist of it, get to a defendable architecture, right? So you have people in place who can help you defend the architecture. The architecture itself will give you the information of what is going on in it with security monitoring tools before you even think about doing a pen test. Because if we come into a flat network, and I always say, as soon as I can ping a PLC, that's end of game, because I can connect to the port, I can see it, I can bring it down, I can wipe the memory remotely. So getting to a defensible architecture is always the first thing you want to do before you go and spend a lot of money on OT pen testing. With that, we got a question. It really depends on how big the network is. I don't shy away from scanning a /8 or /16. I will not do a /P/. So every port in the environment, I will pick some ports to do that, and I will do it low and slow. So depending on how much downtime you have, we either grab a complete 16, or maybe we gotta say, no, a /24 is the only thing we can do across the weekend.
The question was, when running a scan on a client, do you typically scan a whole /16, /8, or are you more conservative? And sounds like you have no fear, Pascal.
As long as they're downtime, right? We're not going to do this during
Mhm.
production, because I've done that, like like Patrick has done in his past. I don't want to be
Mhm.
reminded of it again, but it wasn't pretty.
Depends how much
Yeah.
you like the client. If you don't like the client, yeah, just
We like all our clients.
oh yeah, that's right. We like
So wonderful. Is there anything else anybody would like to add? This was all incredibly informative. All right. And if there are any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You should see on my screen some links for how to try out runZero for yourself. And that is just runzero.com/try. And we encourage you to try it out. You get, pretty much everything you could want for free, up to a certain amount of assets. So yeah, please feel free to try it out. Also, next Wednesday, April 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time is the runZero Hour, which is our monthly research webcast. So if you want to see more of the runZero research team, feel free to join us there. And also, if you want to meet us in person, and who wouldn't, we will be at the RSA conference in what is that, next month? Early May 5th. So May 6th. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to our esteemed panelists for joining us. This was super informative. We have one more question. Can Pascal or Patrick, would you answer this? How would you connect with GuidePoint?
I would say guidepointsecurity.com, right?
that's our
Yeah,
website, guidepointsecurity.com. You can reach out to us on LinkedIn. We can get you connected to a sales rep in your area. But yeah, definitely, yeah, reach out directly connect to us, and then we can get you going in the right direction on that side of things. And then we'll, like I said, we can help you meeting with any of the vendors, help you with vendor selection, and then get you started in your security program.
Wonderful. Well, that was super informative, everyone. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Looks like we had another question. Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. I want everybody to have a nice day, and don't forget to email us if you have any further questions. Thank you so much. Bye.